Thanks very much for coming. I am Jennifer McLennan, Head of External Relations for eLife, and with me on screen is Detlef Weichel, eLife Deputy Editor.
Hello. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Detlef. So we've got a bunch of material to cover today, and we have got a lot of questions from the audience already. So thanks very much for sending those in advance. We're going to try and make good time to cover some of those, but then also to hear from you today. Before we do, we're going to give you some brief background on eLife, and we're going to talk about what we publish in terms of the scope and the quality of the journal before Detlef really hones in on eLife's approach to peer review, which is, of course, why we are assembled here today. We're then going to share a little feedback from recent surveys of authors and reviewers, share what they think about our presentation today, and then we'd like to hear from you. So again, we've got lots of questions to go through. On the right-hand side of your screen, you should have a panel that helps you interact with GoToMeeting. There should be a place to ask questions to the organizers or to the group and chat. So please take advantage of that functionality to share your feedback and send us your questions this afternoon. Okay, so before we really dig in, we just wanted to get a sense of who's joined us here today. So we're wondering, where are you at in your path in science? Are you just starting out? Are you students? Are you postdocs? Are you junior PIs, or do you have way more experience than all of that? So if you could just respond to this quick poll for us, we can get some feedback. Yeah, we've got some results coming in. Great. Or just let me know when to carry on. Yeah? Oh, great. Okay, great. Oh, wonderful. Okay. Okay, great. That's really good to know. It'll help us to adjust the presentation. Thanks for that. Okay, so it's my job to tell you a little bit more about eLife before we talk about our peer review process, to give you some context for what we're up to over here. So eLife is a nonprofit effort. We're a collaboration of three of the best known biomedical research funders in the world: Howard Hughes in the US, the Wellcome Trust in the UK, and Max Planck Society in Germany. And the first thing that these three organizations did was make sure that eLife was led by scientists. So Randy Schekman, our editor-in-chief, has full executive power at eLife. Our mission is to help you do what you do more quickly and more efficiently. So our mission is to help scientists accelerate discovery. And the way that we think we can do that is by operating a locus on the internet, a place, someplace on the ground in science publishing where responsible behaviors are given a place, they're encouraged, and they're recognized. So what we mean by that is we want eLife to be a place where scientists share openly, not just text, but data, tools, resources, software, code, everything. We'd like to be a place where scientists feel free to report comprehensively, to not wait on the reviewers to rewrite the paper, but to really give us your full story. We want to encourage cooperation and collaboration, and we want to be a place where people give constructive feedback and encouragement. Now, that said, eLife will only be so successful if we do these things just ourselves. We really want to inspire change across science publishing, and we want to be able to use our support, our backing, and our resources to test things out, to see what works and what doesn't, and to pass these lessons on to other publishers and other organizations who may be interested. Now, the reasons for eLife, I think, are probably pretty familiar to this group. So what happened was our funders convened a group of about 80 investigators in December 2010. They asked them, what are the issues, really, that you're facing with science publishing? These will be familiar, but, you know, this overdependence on a limited set of journals is creating a bottleneck. And a lot of journals are still printing in print. So there's a limit to the number of research articles that they can publish, and there are limits to the way that they can present the research because they still need to look to putting it onto a printed page. because of this dependency, the incentive structure is a bit misdirected, and the delays and the way people are evaluated is a bit dispiriting for people trying to make their path in science. So at the end of the day, progress not just for science, but also for people and careers is inhibited. So these are the types of things that eLife was set out to try and address. And the way that we think we can do that is by, first of all, establishing a Center for Excellent Science on the web. So the first step was to establish eLife, the journal, as a venue for outstanding work across life sciences and biomedicine. By having a strong foothold in excellent science, it gives us a better position to then innovate and experiment in all aspects of science publishing. So peer review is what we're going to focus on today, and how we've been able to innovate with the peer review process, but it doesn't end there. We want to do new things with how results are presented in an online environment, and we want to do new things with how results are used, which are both made possible because of being in an online interactive environment. By doing these two things, by making eLife the strongest possible journal and innovating in science publishing, we want to drive broad reform in research communication and begin to tackle some of those problems that were defined when eLife was first started. All right, that's enough from me. I'm going to pass it over to Detlef to talk about what we publish, the scope of the journal, and then to dig into the peer review process. Over to you, Detlef.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, so our goal is to publish some of the very best work in the life sciences, and B, to really cover pretty much the entire spectrum of the life sciences, from the most molecular, if not atomic, to things on the very other end of the spectrum, systems neurobiology, ecology, and so on. And to that end, this is shown here what the formal areas are, and you see that they cover subjects that are intimately familiar to many of you listening to this right now, but also perhaps subjects that you don't think about as often. And of course, in order to cover such a very large and diverse set of subjects, we had to assemble a set of editors who are knowledgeable in all these areas. We have, on the one hand, senior editors. These are the folks listed here on this slide. And you can see that we have at least one expert, if not several experts, in each of the areas that were listed on the previous slide. The senior editors oversee the review of the different types of articles that we publish. Most of them are research articles, but we have added to this main type shorter reports. We also publish work that is not only about new biological principles, that is work that is more about tools and resources, then research advance and research exchange, which are special formats that we have developed to change somewhat the normal mode of publication. So research advance, if you have already published an article in eLife, you can add to the previous work. For example, if a reviewer said, well, this is really interesting and it raises this new set of questions, and it would be really nice if in future you would address these questions. So if you then go and do this, you can add to your previously published paper. Research exchange is more when there are differences in opinion about certain parts of science that we have published. We have also magazine content, which is on the next slide. Things that accompany our original research, insights and digest, which either summarize or a little bit more broadly interpret scientific articles that we have published. In editorials, in the past, we have described there our approach to publishing, the motivation behind eLife, and then a series of additional formats which are related to science, open access publishing, and so on. Our goal is, on the one hand, relatively simple, as summarized in this article by Deputy Editor Eve Mater and Senior Editor Vivek Malhotra in a piece they published last year in eLife. Our goal is to publish papers that our reviewers and editors find authoritative, rigorous, insightful, enlightening, or just beautiful. Obviously, that's always somewhat in the eye of the beholder, each one of these, so we do give a little bit more guidance, as shown in the next slide, that we like potential authors to address a series of questions already in their cover letter to help us, the editors, see where their work will fit in. And so questions listed here are how your work will make others in the field think differently and move the field forward, how it relates to current literature on the topic. You might think that this is not such an important point, but it really is, that even though senior editors are conversant in large areas of contemporary modern biology, and even more so our board of reviewing editors, which is around 300 now. Of course, you cannot know every piece of literature that has ever been published on a certain topic. So this is really very helpful if you cite a couple of papers that let us know what the current thinking is in the field that your work addresses. Also, who's the most relevant audience for this work. So again, this helps us when discussing the work and finding appropriate reviewers. And then also to make it clear what the work has achieved and has not achieved. And that might sound a little bit obvious, but again, often in reviewing, unfortunately, it ends up about what a paper doesn't show. And if you say beforehand, look, these are the things that we didn't do, and this is not something that should be considered here, this can be really helpful in the review process. I mentioned already, shown in the next slide, we have published a few editorials on our approach to peer review and our more general ideas about publishing, including those in some of the fields that specifically we are targeting, and they are listed here, and you can easily find them by going to the eLife website. Our growth, as shown in this slide here, has really been quite phenomenal, I would say. We only started publishing a little bit over 4 years ago, and we now publish on average about 80 papers a month. So that works out to about 1,000 papers a year over these diverse areas of science. So it suggests that there are a few things that we are definitely doing right here. And I'd like to take a few more minutes to explain the editorial process after Jen has fielded the next polling question.
Thanks, Detlef. So we want to take this chance to get some feedback from the audience about your experience with eLife. We'd like to know if you've given us a try before, if you've submitted, if you've published, if you've reviewed for us, if you've just read, or if this is the first time that you've learned about eLife. So just give a second, and we'll report back what you tell us. great.
I'm very happy to see that so many of the participants have already submitted or even published in eLife. Fantastic. So that means that many of you already know about the editorial process, but again, I'd like to go over this with a few slides. Our goal, and to be really fair and honest, these are our goals, and we are also just human. So we do not get it always right, but I like to think that we get it right most of the time. And certainly if you feel there are areas of improvements, if your experience was not what it should have been, you must let us know. So our goals are to deliver initial decisions quickly, which I think we do. This is the average is around 3 days. So you send us your initial submission. It is being assigned by a deputy editor to one of the senior editors, and then the senior editor typically discusses it with one or several members of the board of reviewing editors, may also consult outside experts, and after discussion, what often can actually be quite robust and have quite a bit of back and forth, we'll let you know whether your work is something that we'd like to review in depth. Importantly, we are all scientists who run our own labs, so we're still all very much immersed in everyday science, go of course to scientific meetings, and so on and so forth. And more important perhaps that we are active scientists is that there are so many people on the board of reviewing editors that, as I said in the beginning, I think we can really cover almost every area of modern biology. An important part of our approach is that the reviewing editors and the reviewers talk to each other to figure out, among various revision requests that are brought up by reviewers, which ones are the ones that are really essential to the paper, and to really focus also on those that are doable in a reasonable amount of time. If we feel that a paper is in principle interesting, but it needs serious revision, and unfortunately this revision is not feasible within about a couple of months, we would rather decline a paper because we think this is a lot fairer to the author than to dangle the carrot of eventually publishing something in the very distant future after many more additional experiments. Limited rounds of revision, ideally only one round of revision, and the majority of papers that we publish accept have only a single round of revision. The reviewing editor is actually empowered to make an executive decision on his or her own whether the revisions are appropriate. And so that happens in a fair number of cases. It actually does not have to go back to the reviewers, but because the reviewing editor is a specialist, him or herself can make this decision right away. And then finally, we publish the decisions and the author responses, so that the entire process is transparent. You understand why we publish work. So this overview here, this slide, just repeats essentially what I just said. The initial submission, 3 to 4 days, invitation of full submission, then review by reviewing editor with outside reviewers, discussion among the reviewers, decision either that we'd like to publish the work or that it'd be better off being published somewhere else. The next slide shows how the decision times before review have developed. You see that in the very first quarter that we started publishing, we were exceptionally fast. We had very low volume at that time, Times have crept up a little bit, but I think they are still at a very healthy mean of, as I mentioned, 3 to 4 days. Sometimes takes a little bit longer, but then on the other hand, sometimes it's also faster. The next slide shows you what the decision times are after peer review, about a month, which is not super fast. I'll certainly admit that, but I think it's still pretty decent, at least in my own experience at other journals. It can happen these days that you wait for 8 or even 10 weeks. So I think a month is healthy, although of course we'd like it to be faster, but limitation is off to find actually appropriate reviewers. And then the last slide in the series shows how much it takes then total from submission to publication, overall just a little bit over 4 months. And this is actually something that has been impressively steady over the 4 years that we've been publishing papers. Again, the next slide just highlights a few more of these details here, that we published the decision letter together with responses by the authors. Reviewers are encouraged to identify themselves, and if they do so, their names are published as well. The senior editors certainly all identify themselves to the authors, and so do many of the reviewing editors. And this slide shows what the trend has been in terms of whether reviewers are willing to have their name be made available to the authors and have published also to the general audience. And you see that there has been a good trend, that the number of reviewers willing to disclose their names has been increasing, and not only for accepted, but also for papers that have been declined. An important question is, of course, peer review is work that we all do, and it's very difficult to get appropriate credit, academic credit for this, and this is why we support, for example, ORCID and Publons, where you can register, so they keep record of the review services that you deliver. So the last slide then here in this series summarizes how we've been attempting to change the culture of peer review, that highly influential research is broadly defined and selected for publication by working scientists, that we only insist upon additional work if new data are essential to support the major conclusions. If we think that additional work is too much, we will rather decline a paper. As I mentioned, I discussed the open consultation process and the consensus among the reviewers. Open consultation, what that also means is, say you have 3 reviewers, if 2 of them are positive, 1 is negative, then as it would be in a normal discussion around the table, the default is that the positive opinions are more likely to win out than the single negative opinion. And finally, I mentioned ORCID and Publons to help reviewers gain credit. Here's some feedback from recent surveys. First one, why our published authors choose eLife, and you see that indeed our editorial process ranks very highly there. Feedback of reviewers on the eLife process is, again, not everybody, but a very large percentage felt that the consultation is valuable to authors, and most of them also agreed that everybody had a fair opportunity to contribute, not 100%, but a very large fraction. Again, most felt was fair, and that the consultation was helpful. Here are some specific reviewer comments in the next slide. For me, it was perfect. Interaction between reviewers was plenty satisfying. Was one of the better reviewer assignments I've participated in over 25 years. Was completely satisfied. far better than that of other journals, find the process to be most transformative overall. And again, of course, it's not 100%, but a very large fraction of reviewers who felt that way. All right, so then we turn to questions.
Thanks very much, Detlef. So we do have a series of questions to try and take on from before we started today. Have we got some good ones that have come in since? Okay. So Detlef, I know we reviewed the list before, but I'm going to feed them to you in a slightly different order, if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay. So let's take on the first one that we talked about before, which is, what's the advantage of knowing the identity of the other reviewers?
Well, I think the first thing that happens is that it enforces civility amongst reviewers. You discuss with your peers, and we all know that anonymous reviewer sometimes, hopefully not most times, but sometimes can hide behind anonymity and make comments that are superfluous, that are out of place. And when you discuss with your peers, then it's like discussing, say, around a poster at a scientific conference, where I think the spirit normally is much more positive, because it's a scientific activity that you enjoy, and comments that put down the authors are really minimized and are very, very rare. So the discussion process, I think, is much more enjoyable and civil, and just like it should be in everyday life.
That's great. Thank you. All right. Well, I've got a hard one, which is, how does the exclusivity inherent in the high rejection rates from eLife foster the publication of truly novel findings that go against the grain or against prevailing dogma? So I'll take a run at it, Detlef, and see if you want to expand. But it's true that our rejection rates, our acceptance rate, has gone down from about 40% when we first started, when those decisions were really, really fast, down to about 25% and down to about 15% now. We don't want to see this number go down any lower, but it's not a target. It's not a number that we seek to make happen. It's a simple product of working scientists making decisions on the papers that cross their desks every day. So what's different about eLife is that we don't have a target accept or reject rate. We don't have a quota. We don't have a limit to the number of papers that we can publish. So what will be interesting to see is whether our submissions plateau at any point, and where that acceptance rate comes to stabilize. Would you add to that at all?
Yeah, so I think among the senior editors, deputy editors, our editor-in-chief, it's certainly true that in some way we have been rather disappointed that our acceptance rate is what it is. But as you just said, Jen, this is not because we had a certain goal. This is one of the beauties of eLife, that we can publish as many papers as we wish. We've been in a very fortunate financial situation where we've been able to add staff to our offices as our submission number went up, as our number of published papers went up. We've been able to add senior editors, almost doubled that number within 5 years, add to the reviewing editors. So the number of papers published has been really irrelevant to us. This all has emerged organically from the opinions of the senior editors and the reviewing editors of what work constitutes the best work that is out there, and they would like to see published in eLife. I think that the question goes a little bit further. So explosivity, what does that do? Does that encourage publishing work that goes against the grain? And this is a question that I'm very sympathetic with. And I agree that this is of course a trade-off. This is how science works. In science, there are certain hypotheses that we all subscribe to, You can call it dogma or paradigms. And of course, if there's new work that overturns existing dogma, existing paradigms, that inherently is more difficult to publish, that reviewers will ask for a higher standard of proof. On the other hand, I would also say that in eLife, we've published a few papers where we weren't entirely sure. They were, let's say, unusual, and they were going against the grain of prevailing opinion. But on balance, we felt that it was better to see this work published in a high-profile place, because it then would attract many others who would very quickly figure out whether this work was correct or not the work itself, but whether the ideas put forward in this work were again correct. So I'd say it's a trade-off. If there was no exclusivity at all, then of course anything would go, and any theory, any hypothesis would be published. But at eLife, we feel that there is a place for peer review. So this is more a question of should one have peer review or not? And we think, yes, there should be peer review, and it should be more than just has this work been published before.
I think we have a question on preprints from the floor, just speaking of the need for peer review. Okay, so do we have an opinion on bioRxiv? So I thought it might be an opportunity to speak to eLife's support for preprints. So whilst we are very, very committed to a rigorous and thorough form of peer review, we absolutely support at the same time the need to get people's results out quickly, to release results to the people who need them, put your name on it, get a date stamp on it, and then later on go through peer review. So I'm not sure if everyone on the call is aware that there have been pretty strong moves toward preprints in biology in recent months. So through the ASAP Bio meetings convened and with support from bioRxiv preprints, PeerJ and other services as well. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah, so as you just said, Jen, we are supporting preprint, but what I would like to add there, something that perhaps not everybody knows, that we have a policy of scoop protection at eLife, which somewhat goes in this direction of preprint. So this is, if we commit to reviewing your work and we end up deciding that we'd like to publish your work pending certain revisions, then we stick to that decision, even if during the revision another paper comes out that that comes to similar conclusions and perhaps contains similar experiments. I think this is really quite important.
Thanks, Detlef. And that was a question that had come in earlier as well. So thanks for tackling that. I've got another one for you, which is a concern about the viewpoint of a reviewer not being placed as equal to that of the author or a peer, but a reviewer's viewpoint being treated as superior. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, so I think, again, what we're dealing with here is similar to the question about exclusivity. Those are appropriate questions, but I think they're always just trade-offs built in, and you have to find the best compromise. So, for example, if you submit a paper with certain experiments in it, so very likely you as a person in the world who are the world's experts on those specific experiments and those specific questions asked. So in a way, reviewers can't be peers because they haven't done those experiments. So they can only, use other knowledge that they have to review the work as best as they can. Of course, a reviewer being outside ideally will be a lot more objective about the both strengths and weaknesses of work submitted for publication than I would be I myself as the experimenter. again, so at eLife, because we have this open consultation, I think in most cases, this really enforces civility, and we end up with decision letters that are encouraging that even when we decline work, that we try to emphasize what is positive, but that eLife is just not the right venue for it. So I sympathize with this question that unfortunately there are reviewers who sort of lord it over the authors. I think that is wrong. I completely agree with this, and we are trying everything we can to not act as superiors, but really as peers of the authors.
One of my favorite comments from the senior editors is that because eLife doesn't have limitations on the number of papers that we can publish, there's no need to limit them every week. We don't have weekly space meetings where we have to say, okay, we can only publish 10 papers, who's got to go? So it changes the nature of the conversation in this person's opinion. They said, you know, we have the opportunity in this space to talk about what's positive in a paper rather than looking for reasons to tear it down.
But
so,
if I may add one thing there, by the way, it cuts both ways. So when we started out, we did not know how many papers would be submitted to us. So we would not have grown to this number if we had only a very small number of papers submitted. So again, we are now in the comfortable and fortunate situation that we have a very healthy number of submissions. Well, we didn't set out saying, okay, after a year, we need to publish at least so and so many papers, no matter how many submissions come in.
So, Delith, we had a follow-up question on the preprint conversation from Violaine C. And she was wondering about post-publication reviewing and comments and whether we would see eLife changing our model and publishing everything with post-publication open reviews.
This is something that we have already, of course, discussed as general approaches to peer review. This would be very unlikely in the near or even midterm future, I would say. Again, I'm very sympathetic to this general idea. Those who know me know, for example, that I'm quite interested in the social networks and commenting on the research of others on Twitter and so on. But it's unfortunately also a fact that comments, for example, on bioRxiv are quite rare. So also on eLife, you can, of course, comment on work that we publish, but it's relative, as you can, for example, all the PLOS journals, comments are actually very, very rare. So post-publication peer review sounds fantastic in principle. My experience has been that there is relatively little of this happening. At least now it is at a rate that it is not very useful yet. Maybe that's going to change. If it does, if we'll see that in future, published papers attract many more post-publication comments, and that these comments are useful and insightful and are at a similar level and depth as the kind of review comments that we get from our reviewers, maybe we would move to a different model, but right now that's not going to happen.
It'll be interesting to see how open commenting and review grows in the context of preprints and all the papers that are going to be made available soon there. And it raises a question, another question that was raised earlier, which is whether eLife supports peerage of science reviews. So I understand that we do already receive reviews from independent reviewing services, and we're very happy to take those into account. But it also reminds me about portable peer review. Do you want to say anything before I jump to portable peer review?
Yes, so as you just mentioned, so we already work with some of the colleagues who do independent reviewing. We do consider those. We look at them. We do treat them similar to regular submissions. So the comments that are already delivered with these manuscripts, of course, help us make a decision. But in the end, we would still review papers ourselves. So we see them as supporting, but not replacing our review process.
Yeah, you know, in general, we're very aware that peer review and reviewing again and again for different journals is a burden on the system. So there are lots of chances to try and reduce that. So on the other side of it, what we do is if you are peer reviewed at eLife and your paper is not accepted, we will very happily package up your reviews and pass them to the journal of your choice with the reviewer identities, provided that the reviewers agree. We've had pretty good uptake by the reviewers on that. So it's a service that we offer, again, to help reduce the burden on peer reviewers. So,
Jen, maybe there's one more thing, if I may, there. So what occasionally has happened, not very often, but occasionally has happened, that actually authors contacted us and they were very forward with us, and they said, look, here's work that was reviewed elsewhere, didn't make it, and these were the comments that we received from the reviewers. We disagree with these comments, and we think that the work actually should be published at a very high level. And we then take that on board, and again, that can help us make up our mind. Of course, in this case, we don't know who the reviewers are, so we will take them with more than just a grain of salt. But knowing the prior history of a paper and having prior reviewer comments, anybody is free to deliver those with their submission, and we don't necessarily hold that against you.
All right. Well, we've got several questions about rejections and appeals that I want to go at. So. We got several questions. We did get a couple questions about individual papers, and unfortunately, it's just too difficult to comment on individual situations in a conversation like this. But generally speaking, we do aim to treat appeals in a timely manner and with the fairness and respect that they deserve. We do receive a handful of appeals of rejection decisions before peer review and after, and some decisions have been overturned. If you're rejected and you feel you've got good grounds, and the grounds should be that a mistake was made, or there's been a factual error, you can certainly submit an appeal. Responses to appeals for papers rejected before peer review can take just a few days. After peer review, it takes us a little bit longer to make sure we've got the right voices, or if we need extra opinions, it takes a bit longer. And another question was with regard to rebuttal letters.
Maybe Cynthia, so if I may add to this, so. In the interest of transparency, and that came out in one of the questions that was submitted beforehand, one of the participants asked, does it make sense at all to submit appeals, because I heard, quoting from that inquiry, I heard that that's pretty much useless anyway. So I think that is not true at eLife. While I don't want to encourage everybody who has been declined to immediately submit their appeals, appeals have a reasonable success rate. If most appeals worked, I think it would mean that we don't do our job right. But we admit that we can make mistakes, that we can overlook certain things. Interestingly, perhaps, is that appeals that are ask reconsidering an initial submission, that they are slightly more successful than the appeals after full peer review. So obviously, full peer review, we've thought a lot more about a paper than in the initial decision. But it is far from far from impossible to appeal and having the editor reconsider. Majority of questions, majority of time, we will stick to our decision, but again, it's not hopeless to appeal.
Thank you. I'm trying to nail 10 questions at once. Let me try 2 more, and then I've got a question for you. So there was a question about whether rebuttal letters may be sent to reviewers, and they will be if the editor feels it's needed. And then can the authors not respond to minor comments? And I think yes, right? The focus of the consultation and of the letter is to focus on the major comments. We want the authors to respond to the major, not the minor.
So exactly. So that's our default, and I do think it says that in our decision letters. But again, here I'd like to reiterate this. We think that our authors are adults. And if we say, you know, there are a few typos or maybe rephrase this, we think they can do this and we don't have to check this again. So we trust our authors that they will read what the reviewer said regarding minor comments.
And last question on rejections and appeals, unless you want to expand, but the question was if the appeal could be sent to a different editor than the person who rejected the paper.
Yeah, so it's something that we obviously have been discussing. It's difficult. So ideally, I would say it should go to different editors, and there are certainly cases where this is how we've handled it. Sometimes we are just constrained in terms of the expertise that is on the board or people who are available, and then it might be considered by the same editor or editors again. But normally we try to get additional opinions. I would say there is not one pattern that just fits every appeal.
Thank you, Detlef. A question from the floor. What does it take to be a reviewer for eLife? How do we choose reviewers, and how can people get into the mix?
We of course have a database of people who have already reviewed for us, and we try to annotate that database so that we know who provided particularly insightful comments, who responded within a reasonable amount of time. Otherwise, of course, number one are the senior editors and reviewing editors who think of names of reviewers. But then very big sources, of course, reviewers or potential reviewers whom we contact and whom we ask to nominate alternates if they are not available for whatever reason. But we also welcome self-nomination. So certainly some of our best reviewing editors on our board of reviewing editors were from colleagues who said, well, I really like the eLife process so much, I would like to contribute more. And if there is an opening on the board of reviewing editors, I would be pleased to be considered. Perhaps also important, Jen, maybe you can say a few things about our junior reviewer database, so to speak. So what we really encourage are co-reviews by postdocs and graduate students, as long as that is being disclosed in the review. And we actually we formally capture those names so that we build up early career researcher reviewer database.
So there's a couple of ways that we're populating that. So in the first instance, if you're named as the co-reviewer on a paper, we'll capture that information manually. And if you want to go to Publons or ORCID and take credit, we'll verify it. And whether or not you're actually named on the decision letter that's made public, you can take credit for having been involved in a review. We're also working with the editors to extend our early career reviewer pool. So, so folks who've been recommended and have independent physicians of their own are being added to our database. And the trick, as Detlef says, the trick is now to get the editors to use them. We've got about 300 in the mix right now, and I think maybe 10% of them have been used so far. So that'll be something we need to work on in the new year. So Detlef, I've got a couple of questions on scope. They're general questions. I'm going to send 3 of them at you at one time because they have to do with, you know, is eLife interested in manuscripts in which the biological insight isn't obtained via experiment, but by theoretical analysis or model? That's the first one. As a theorist, I usually hesitate submission to pure biological journals because they often require experiments. Would we consider highly novel, provocative papers, but with only computational supports? And then the last one is related and possibly exactly the same. Will you accept a theoretical paper which is having solid evidence by computational work but no experimental evidence?
So I think the answers to all 3 questions is yes, yes, yes. And we actually have a feature, and maybe we can pull that up in some way, Jennifer. So some of our senior editors have actually published a piece in eLife what kind of theory papers we'd love. What is the place of theory papers in biology, and what kind of theory papers we look for. Of course, again, we're dealing with the typical trade-off here. So if it's something that is completely new, then certainly papers that are theory only or computational only will make it into eLife. If it's not quite as new, let's say, then normally a dose of experiment will be required.
So here's a great follow-up question from the floor, from Santosh, which is the scope of eLife actually restricted to developmental and molecular biology? Because people have that impression, you know, and he says he doesn't see a lot on human genetics and genomics.
No, we really consider essentially anything that, as I said, belongs to the modern life sciences, even includes paleontology. And we have, for example, in human genetics, we have Mark McCarthy as a senior editor who is a card-carrying human geneticist. We have quite a few reviewing editors who do modern human population genetics, do GWAS, and so on and so forth. So I hope when you look at the list of senior editors that we have, that we are much more than just developmental and molecular biology, although I can easily see where that initial impression might come from. So maybe just about myself, I started out as a molecular developmental biologist, and over the last years have transformed myself into an evolutionary genomicist. So I'm very fond of these kind of submissions.
Thank you, and I'll just add that the remit of the journal is to go across into translational and clinical work as well, and we haven't got much coverage there, so that's a priority for us. So if anyone has recommended editors, or you want to talk about your paper with us, please do reach out. And also, you know, the feedback from folks is that, you know, they take a look at our board and they don't see their expertise readily apparent, and that's fine because we've grown so much. These are just our earliest years. But if we receive a paper that we don't have the expertise on the board of reviewing editors to handle it, we go get a guest editor to handle it. That's how the journal grows. So please, you know, give us a shot. You know, in clinical, translational, Fiona will redirect it, and if we don't have someone on the board, she'll find someone.
So we've never turned away a submission because it was too far from our expertise, as long as it was related to the life sciences. We have sometimes struggled with finding experts, that I'll admit, but we haven't turned it down because senior editors or reviewing editors weren't the right fit.
Thanks, Detlef. Well, it sounds like we've reached the hour, and we're going to have to go. I would be happy to stick around and answer a few more questions, but Detlef, I know that you've got to run.
I'd be happy to stay around, say, another 10 minutes or so. And I should also mention that, the holidays are coming up, so this is not the best of times. But if there are burning questions that any of you have on your mind, feel free to drop me an email. Sometimes the answer might be very short, but I also welcome comments. Certainly, we saw this on the questions that we have collected, that some of you had great experience, but there were a few whose experience weren't so great. And again, we are just humans. We do make mistakes. I'll admit to this. And at least I'd like to hear about it if there are areas where we can improve.
Thanks, Detlef. Okay, well, if you guys are happy to stick around for a few minutes more, we are too. Lots of questions still to go through from pre-submission. So we should just tackle a couple of those and see if folks have some more for us today. Gosh, there's a hard one here, Detlef, where the question is what eLife is doing to dismantle the incentives for publishing in Cell Nature Science that drives securing a faculty position, winning grants, and tenure. So let me take a quick run at that and see what you would add. But so my experience is in advocacy in Washington and working on public access policies, that type of thing. So the need for eLife was quite clear about 7 years ago, and the first thing that we set out to do is establish a venue for fantastic science as judged by working scientists. So not one that artificially limits the number of papers that we can publish, not one that seeks a lot of media coverage, not one that seeks a lot of citations in the short term. So we've achieved that. We've done it. We have got a wonderful resource for many, many, many fields where the quality is judged by working scientists. The next thing is, of course, getting people jobs. People want to know, is having eLife on my resume going to get me the job? Is it going to get me the grant? We're getting more and more reports from the field that eLife authors are succeeding on the backs of their eLife papers. So that's great. That's just what we want to have happen. The challenge is really one of awareness and helping people to see what we publish and to get to know our name. Of course, that's not the end game. The end game has to be to change research assessment practices and get those people making the decisions on hiring and funding to not rely solely on the person's publication record to evaluate them. So that's something that we want to take on, both through conversations with research funders, but also helping to create a much more rich view on what a person can do to contribute to science. What do you think?
Perhaps, Jen, so this is, I think it's related to this question, something that's actually very important to us and that we haven't touched upon so far, is that one very important goal to us is that other journals copy or even improve upon the eLife process. So we don't see this just as a competitive edge. I think right now it is. But one of the main reasons why I'm dedicating a large part of my working life to eLife is that I felt that the reviewing process could be improved. And I hope that eventually all journals will adopt an eLife-like process. And I think it's quite clear that a number of journals have started to go in the eLife direction. So I think we see more and more consultation among reviewers and also more discussion, meaningful discussion between editors and authors, a lot of different journals.
Yeah, we've had several journals make inquiries and several journals take efforts into their own hands, which is great. But if you work with a journal and would like to see them explore a consultative approach, please just contact us. We'd be very, very happy to talk about our experience, to talk about our systems, to talk about our numbers, anything. So please don't hesitate. All right, another question here from the floor, Jean-Philippe Herbeval. Do we publish opinion pieces?
We do publish opinion pieces, but normally only invited pieces. But of course, if you have a great idea, if you think this is something that would fit into eLife, you're of course free to send us a note.
And Margarita asks if we might consider hiding the names of the authors to the reviewers.
Yeah, it's certainly something that we have discussed. Double-blind review. Our impression was that it's perhaps often not practical, and in many, if not most cases, it's relatively apparent who the authors are. So again, I'm personally sympathetic to the idea to have a double-blind review. I think it's not the most practical thing to do.
Thanks, Detlef. I get that feedback a lot from early career reviewers, or sorry, early career authors who are concerned about submitting a paper and not being recognized, you know, by senior investigators and thus being dismissed. But my response is often that the transparency that we build into the process, the consultation amongst the senior editor and the reviewing editors right up front in making an initial decision is one of the ways that we hope to iron out any type of bias. And I have to say that the editors have made very clear to me from the beginning that supporting early career development is a priority. You know, going back to our very first senior editors meeting, they said, we're not doing eLife for ourselves, we're doing this for our trainees, because it's them who suffer the worst because of the limitations of science publishing today.
And perhaps, Jen, also to add, I think that sometimes it's overestimated what the influence of senior researchers in a field is, because people who who wear many different hats, they are much more likely to decline a review invitation, even from the most exalted journal. So if you are an early career researcher and you deliver diligent, expert reviews, very likely you will be asked again to review, and you will contribute to making sure that a broad set of opinions is sought for manuscripts.
All right, question from Susanna Rutherford. Detlef, she says she's still concerned that the collaborative process taints the benefits for authors of having independent reviews, at least in the first phase.
Yeah, again, there are trade-offs. It's that is inherent. Certainly, if I review something where, say, I'm not very close to a certain area, and then I see another review, and I know for sure this is somebody who has, you know, supposedly the credentials that they are the expert in the field, I will be more likely to defer to their opinion. On the other hand, it also helps me to gauge how seriously to take some of these opinions. So I can see Susanna's point. I don't want to dismiss it at all, but it's a trade-off, and we decided that the benefits of knowing each other outweighs some of the weaknesses that come with it.
Thanks, Detlef. All right, we've got a question that came in advance that's firmly in my domain, so I'm going to take that, and then we've got a video that we want to leave you guys with. If there are any other last-minute questions, please feel free to type them into the viewer, and do contact us, and I'll put up an email address in just a moment to get back to us with feedback at any point. And of course, we'll be in touch by email. The event today has been recorded, so hopefully you'll share this information with your colleagues. So the question that I wanted to take on was about eLife's approach to public outreach and making published material more visible to a greater audience. So a few things we've covered on. Folks are aware that getting exposure for what we publish has been a priority from the beginning. It's an expectation for a high-profile journal, or any journal, really. So in the first instance, we alluded to scoop protection, but it goes beyond that. We want to encourage you to talk about your work, to share it with colleagues, potential collaborators, every time you get the chance. If you post your manuscript as a preprint, if you present it at a conference, these things are not going to affect your chances at being peer-reviewed and published at eLife. It will not affect editorial consideration. Detlef did mention scoop protection, so if whilst your paper is under review at eLife, someone publishes similar findings, no problem. It will not affect your experience at eLife. If you want to publish your peer-reviewed manuscript at the end of that process, if it's been accepted, we'll put it online within 24 hours if that's what you'd like to do. We also, we believe we have a role in facilitating public communication and helping a wider audience to embrace science, to engage with science. So we do prepare plain language summary for almost all of our papers, about 300 words that helps colleagues in other disciplines and also the public to understand what you've done. We commission expert commentaries on about a fifth of our papers. We call them eLife Insights. We feature authors in interviews, podcasts, etc. And we do send press releases, but we also help your institution to issue press releases. The publication date of eLife papers is not a secret, and we want to work with as many partners as possible to shine a light on the work that we publish. We've got a very active Twitter stream. Detlef is an active contributor. We do travel grants to help authors talk about their eLife work at meetings of their choice. But the most important thing that we can do to build the audience is to publish great work. So one great paper yields another great paper, and now we publish in paleontology. All right, well, folks, I think are starting to slide away now. So I've got a URL here for you to take, and maybe someone could post it into the chat window as well, so you can take a look. We've captured some perspectives from eLife authors. Now, we've been publishing for a few years. We've got some experience under our belt and wanted to share that with you. And then I'll play that for you. If you want to stick around, I'll play it for you. But we also want to leave you with our email address so that if you have any other questions about any aspects of eLife, what our mission is, the scope of the journal, decisions, just go ahead and contact us. We're an open door, and we'd be really pleased to hear from you. Detlef, anything you want to add before I play a video?
What I'd like to add, please submit your best work to eLife, and if we ask you to be a reviewer, please review for us.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Weigel. There is a link in the right-hand window now. I'm going to turn off our webcams and play a video, and we wish everyone a wonderful holiday season. Thank you very much for coming today.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Peer review can really feel like it's working against scientists sometimes. Authors often receive multiple conflicting comments from reviewers that might be impossible to reconcile. You can end up spending months on extra experiments and unnecessary delays. At eLife, we've taken a fresh approach to peer review, where reviewers consult with one another before going back to the author. Our aim is to deliver clear, constructive input so you can publish and get on with your work.
eLife say that they are looking for a different publishing paradigm, but actually it's true. So my experience of the whole process was that it was very constructive and very positive.
At eLife, once the independent reviews are received, one of our reviewing editors leads an open online consultation among referees so they can discuss their feedback. Together, they synthesize and prioritize comments so the editor can craft a single consolidated list of essential revisions to the author. Contradictory or confusing recommendations are eliminated, and authors are much clearer on how the reviewers feel the manuscript might be refined for acceptance.
A review that is respectful and intelligent, even if it's tough. It can be constructive rather than destructive. Often reviews are destructive, especially for younger people.
eLife's review process helps to ensure that unnecessary experiments are avoided. We ask reviewers to focus on the major conclusions of the paper and to limit requests for new experiments to those that can be done in 2 months or less. And we save authors time. Post-review decisions are delivered in about a month, and because the decision letter is clear, the majority of eLife authors complete just 1 round of revision and are able to submit revised manuscripts in less than 60 days. When reviewers consult, it's a meeting of the best minds on the subject, or on many subjects when the work spans different fields. It's an open, respectful exchange focused on the science at hand and how to help the author get the story out.
So as both an eLife author as well as a reviewer, I can see that eLife is not only providing a fair review, but significantly contributing to nurturing and cultivating new innovative science.
You know, the nature of this effort, the eLife effort, has been really something quite out of the ordinary.
And yeah, I felt it was a genuinely different and really supportive process.
Let eLife help you get out your best work. Submit today.